Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about how the president is trying to change voting here in America so that he can't be held accountable and so he and the Republican Party can remain in power. May 2024. The Safeguard Voter Eligibility Act, or SAVE, was introduced in the House by Congressman Chip Roy and by Mike Lee in the Senate. The SAVE Act seeks to change voting laws so that citizens have to show two forms of ID when registering to vote and when voting. There are other changes in there as well, like the feds get to see lists of voters that can be culled at their discretion. It means that the government gets to decide if you can vote or not. The SAVE Act makes it harder to use mail-in voting. A person wishing to use mail-in voting must register in person. Hard for some people that are elderly or maybe disabled. In Texas, to vote by mail, one must only make a phone call to request a voter mail-in ballot and certify the ballot with one of 4 different forms of ID numbers. The administration wishes to get rid of mail-in voting, calling it cheating, even though our own president voted in his Florida's primary using a mail-in ballot. He also used a mail-in ballot in 2020. I guess what's good for the goose ain't good for the gander. This bill makes it so the feds have access to an official eligible voter list. Any head of a federal department may scrutinize an individual who is already on the official voting list to requiring further information. That individual has 24 hours after being notified to provide such information, or they lose the eligibility to vote. So after registering and making it to the official voter list, the head of the Department of Homeland Security can take away a person's eligibility to vote. You see, the government is supposed to make these things simple and easy so that all Americans can accomplish them. Some might say that the process should be difficult, so that only smart people or rich people can vote. That isn't how freedom works. If someone is to represent us, then we deserve the chance to choose who that person is. March 25th, 2025, an executive order was implemented by the president. It states that America has a faulty voting system and that other countries like India and Brazil have a way to make voters use biometrics, fingerprints I assume, to ensure that voters are who they say they are, as if that is the best way to do voter verification. For the record, when the government has a majority control of the way things are ran in a country, it is called fascism. It means letting the government control everything, basically. Voting is handled by the states. The administration is trying desperately to change voting laws so that the federal government will have control over elections. The SAVE Act is centered around voter fraud, particularly illegal aliens voting in elections. There is a conservative think tank called the Heritage Foundation that has been tracking and verifying voter fraud. They have around 1,700 cases of confirmed voting fraud. It states these cases are not comprehensive. That means that they didn't all happen in the same election. There were about 174 million votes in the last presidential election. Let's assume for a moment that the 1,700 verified cases of fraud all happened in the last presidential election. If we divide the number of votes by how many were fraudulent, that means that 0.000009 of the votes were fraudulent. That isn't a voter fraud problem. We can research the individual voter fraud cases. I read a few of them, and they all seem to be a giant waste of time. Illegally registering to vote or illegal voting is a federal crime. The ends just don't seem to justify the means. Why these people went out of their way to illegally vote really doesn't make any sense. The extra vote doesn't seem worth it. Their records go back to 1984, I believe. On the subject of illegal aliens voting, the records only go back to the year 2000. You know how many illegal aliens tried to vote from 2000 until now? 100 people. And those aren't comprehensive either. 100 illegal votes in 26 years. That's not a voter fraud problem. So if fraud isn't the real reason for these changes in voting law, there must be another. Illegals don't care to vote in elections. They don't want anyone to find out they are here illegally. March 31st, 2026, the Verification and Integrity in Federal Elections Executive Order was released, Order 14399. This executive order seeks to compile a list of acceptable voters, then distribute the list down to states. Just because an individual is on the federally compiled list doesn't mean that those individuals are registered to vote. So we have to qualify to be on a federal list of potential voters before we can qualify or register with the state we live in. It turns registering to vote from a one-step process to a two-step process. If using a mail-in ballot, the envelope must be specifically marked. The envelope must be marked with a barcode, so the individual letter can be tracked. This executive order demands states keep voter registration information, whether an individual votes or not, on record for 5 years. How do these implementations serve the people? These different pieces of legislation are centered around proving that someone is a citizen. It's redundant and a violation of the Fourth Amendment for an individual to have to prove specifically that they are a citizen. If someone is a citizen, they will have the documents of a citizen. The way the system currently is already requires someone to be a citizen, or at least naturalized. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to register. These various legislative finger paintings have nothing to do with serving the people and everything with federal government control, so that election outcomes are basically chosen by the feds. It might already be this way. It was just more hidden before, more polite, so we feel like we accomplished something when we vote. A little food for thought. The president is almost single-handedly trying to change voting laws here in America. Just because the government says something is a good idea doesn't mean that it is. For example, where I live here in Texas, one of my representatives, Lance Gooden to be specific, distributes information now and again to us, his constituents. When I would receive these flyers or whatever they are, it would state good things about him, and somewhere on the paper, it was more like thin cardboard, it would read, "Paid for by funds set aside by Congress." It took me a while to dig up the specifics on this. The flyer that I had received was the result of a congressman's budget that allowed House members to distribute certain kinds of information. Campaigning with tax dollars is illegal. It turns out that there is a loophole for campaigning using these appropriated funds. It isn't campaigning if it doesn't read, "Vote for me." So the words will read, "Lance Gooden for Congress." However, it doesn't have the words, "Vote for me." Seems like some of these laws need updating. Campaigning is more than the words, "Vote for me." Anyway, the term for this type of information sharing is franking. It is allowable propaganda if you think about it. The way it works is the congressman uses his signature in place of stamps. What would normally pay to ship the flyer, Lance Gooden, during one of his terms in office, spent $70,000 in franking funds. There are 435 congressmen in the House. Let's give the other House members the benefit of the doubt and say every other member only spent $50,000. So $50,000 multiplied by 435 is $21,750,000. They potentially spend $21,750,000 every term not campaigning. Wink, wink. That isn't a true estimation, however. This franking information isn't so easy to obtain. It has to be requested from the House Clerk's office. So Congress says that this is lawful and good legislation, creating a way for congressmen to campaign using the people's money. If this is allowed, then it must be a good idea that serves the people, right? A note on Trump derangement syndrome. I think I would rather have Trump derangement syndrome than be a bootlicker. We are licking all over Trump's boots, when we should be licking the boots of Lady Liberty. We are licking his boots, all over his feet, in between his toes, up his legs, his butt, his crotch, up his nose, licking his ear holes, the one that got shot and the one that didn't. Sorry, that was a tangent. Ah ha ha! Ah ah ha ha! Be American first! Love you, Scott. Love you all.